Hey, good afternoon to you. 406 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up on the program this hour, Guy Reschenthaler, the Congressman, is with us. At 4:30, we'll talk about his plans to rename Dulles Donald J. Trump International Airport. We'll ask him about that. Then Julie Kelly is here at 5 o'clock. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. President Donald Trump with a big announcement today. He says abortion regulation should be left to the states and that in vitro fertilization, IVF, should be widely available. Here he is in a video today on his own platform, Truth Social, stating his position ahead of the election.
Under my leadership, the Republican Party will always support the creation of strong, thriving, and healthy American families. We want to make it easier for mothers and families to have babies, not harder. That includes supporting the availability of fertility treatments like IVF in every state in America. Like the overwhelming majority of Americans, including the vast majority of Republicans, conservatives, Christians, and pro-life Americans, I strongly support the availability of IVF for couples who are trying to have a precious baby. What could be more beautiful or better than that? Today, I'm pleased that the Alabama legislature has acted very quickly and passed legislation that preserves the availability of IVF in Alabama. They really did a great and fast job. The Republican Party should always be on the side of the miracle of life and the side of mothers, father, their beautiful babies, and that's what we are. IVF is an important part of that, and our great Republican Party will always be with you in your quest for the ultimate joy in life.
Additionally, Trump went on to say that it's the left who's extreme on this issue.
Many people have asked me what my position is on abortion and abortion rights, especially since I was proudly the person responsible for the ending of something that all legal scholars, both sides, wanted and, in fact, demanded be ended. Roe v. Wade. They wanted it ended. It must be remembered that the Democrats are the radical ones on this position because they support abortion up to and even beyond the 9th month. The concept of having an abortion in the later months and even execution after birth, and that's exactly what it is. The baby is born, the baby is executed after birth, is unacceptable. And almost everyone agrees with that.
An allusion to former Virginia Governor Ralph Northam, the Democrat, talking about leaving a baby to die on the table after birth. Trump also said that this should not be a federal issue now. This should be a state issue.
My view is now that we have abortion where everybody wanted it from a legal standpoint, the states will determine by vote or legislation or perhaps both. And whatever they decide must be the law of the land. In this case, the law of the state. Many states will be different. Many will have a different number of weeks, or some will have more conservative than others, and that's what they will be. At the end of the day, this is all about the will of the people. You must follow your heart or, in many cases, your religion or your faith. Do what's right for your family and do what's right for yourself. Do what's right for your children. Do what's right for our country and vote. So important to vote. At the end of the day, it's all about will of the people. That's where we are right now, and that's what we want, the will of the people.
There's a lot more audio here, but before we get there, I want to bring in our guest. John Hasson is the contributor at Townhall, and he joins us now. John, good to have you with us, sir.
Thanks, Vince. I'm glad to be here.
So here you have Donald Trump. In my impression is that what he's ultimately trying to do is table the abortion debate. That he's saying, look, I put the judges in place, the justices in place. I got Roe v. Wade overturned. It's a great success. So we need to celebrate life as Americans. But beyond that, let's just table this debate for now so it's not a big issue during the campaign. Am I reading that right?
I think you're right. I think he is trying to table it. I think he's trying to dodge it to a degree. But I think the problem is Democrats won't let him. And we've seen as soon as he put out his statement, the Biden campaign immediately put out clips of Trump. I mean, even in the video that you just played, he leads with, I was the guy that overturned Roe v. Wade. Mm-hmm. And if you're the guy that overturned Roe v. Wade, you can't run from the issue. You can't table it, especially as Democrats are trying to pass national legislation to federalize abortion law.
Yes.
So you can't really duck the issue, I don't think.
Yeah, and so in other words, like attempting to take a middle ground, it's not going to serve you well in the sense that the left is going to lie, guaranteed, about whatever your position is.
No, absolutely. They'll lie about him one way or the other. If he takes the position that abortion should be left to the states, they're still going to say that he wants to ban abortion nationwide. Or what they're already doing is they're taking the most extreme state examples and they're saying Donald Trump supports this. And as a result, now it's even worse for him, because if he had endorsed a certain week limit, he could at least have that position and say that I support abortion only up to, X number of weeks. But now Democrats can take a position anywhere across the country, which is oftentimes more extreme than anything he would propose, and say that he supports that because he supports state rights.
I also played at the audio at the outset of kind of an enthusiastic endorsement for in vitro fertilization, IVF, which is, I realize, I guess you're not allowed to talk about it, but it is controversial to give a full-throated endorsement to IVF, because IVF is the fertilization of an egg. I mean, you're literally creating, if you believe that life begins at conception, it's a human life. And some estimates say that upwards of 1.8 million embryos a year are destroyed through IVF, actually destroyed, which is way above abortion rates in the United States, which have historically been around 1 million per year. That's so. In other words, 1.8 million, very early gestational lives being destroyed per year. Do you get the sense that, I don't know, I mean, how do you react to that? Donald Trump coming out and kind of giving a full-throated endorsement to IVF, and when voters, pro-life voters especially, are looking at the options here, they're definitely going with Trump over Biden, right?
Yeah, I think they'll absolutely go with Trump over Biden, because even if he's not the ideal pro-life candidate, he's still worlds better than a full-throated abortion endorsement. But to the IVF point, I do think it's disappointing to very ardent pro-lifers, myself included, because as you pointed out, if you believe that life begins at conception, IVF does that, and it can be helpful for couples if they're trying to just one at a time have children. But if you're storing all of these lives in a freezer or in other centers, then those are human lives. And if they're getting destroyed, it's just the same as if you were destroying it in a woman's womb. Now,
the reality of our system is nobody can by decree just come up with an outcome that we all desire. I mean, that's not going to happen. You do need the consent of the governed. That is a reality here. One of the things that I thought was it was a feature of Vivek Ramaswamy's campaign that I kind of appreciated was that he kept coming out and basically saying what we need in the United States is to instill a culture of life that we don't have right now, that we need to basically figure out a way to get people to think kind of what Donald Trump was saying just a moment ago, which is that we need to really value children and the American family and elevate that value across our population. That seems like actually maybe of the foremost concern, that we have a culture of life first and foremost, so that we can get people to go to the polls in the end and vote for the better outcomes.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think, culture will dictate political opinions and political positions. And if you have a voting population that doesn't believe in a culture of life, then you won't get votes supporting a culture of life. And I think that was something that Vivek did well, is he pointed out that America right now has a cultural issue. And we need to value not just protecting children when they're in the womb or when they're born, but also just having children. I think that's something that Elon Musk has actually done a fairly good job of highlighting too, is the population collapse that's kind of we're experiencing in America, and also other European countries are as well. People just aren't having as many children as they used to, and they're not embracing that culture of life.
And every so often in Congress, so there's a couple of rules for the federal government here that don't involve creating laws. One of them is stripping funding from Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood is responsible for killing so many children every year in the United States of America. They're doing it at taxpayer expense, although they, of course, claim, we're not using that money. We're just using the other money we have. No, of course, we're underwriting all of your abortions. Why not call for defunding Planned Parenthood at the same time that you're saying that states should advance laws to protect life?
I think he absolutely should. I think if you're going to take the position that everything should be happening at the state level, then you really need to defund Planned Parenthood, give them no federal dollars, and completely disentangle the federal government from anything relating to the abortion question.
Yes.
However, I don't know if that's entirely possible, and I wonder if that's why he's not calling for it. I think you can absolutely defund Planned Parenthood, but actually disentangling the federal government might be a tricky thing to do. I think ultimately this is an electoral strategy where he's just trying to table the issue and get to the White House.
Sure, but to expand on that point, though, where you think it's difficult to disentangle the federal government from all of this abortion in the United States. What do you mean?
So I think that there are a number of ways that you could just try to tangentially, whether it's related to Planned Parenthood or whether it's other, the IVF issue or other things.
Yeah.
It's very difficult, I think, to just have the federal government entirely uninvolved. Maybe it's much easier than I think. But there are just, whether it could be a Democratic president getting back in office and immediately reversing any executive decisions that Trump made, or whether or not it's just bills that are passed, it'll be tough to actually dodge the issue entirely. Basically, it would just make it so that Republican administrations wouldn't touch the abortion question or wouldn't get involved, but then Democratic administrations would immediately jump back in and get re-involved. And the way that I think about it is that would just be a one-way ratchet to the left. Republicans would never really push towards a pro-life vision. They would just kind of be neutral. And then each time that Democrats get into office, they push the envelope further and further to the left.
Well, it is a total violation of the American taxpayers' benevolence, basically, under duress. We're giving all this money to use that money to then turn around and abort children, whether or not they support that. And of course, I know many people who feel like they are part of, including myself, who I feel like I'm a part of an atrocity against my will because of the way the federal government uses the money that it takes from me every month, every paycheck. And it used to be that that all Americans have kind of agreed on that point. We used to talk about the Hyde Amendment and preventing federal funding for abortion, and with limited exceptions, they would include exceptions for rape or incest or life of the mother. Those were the exceptions built into the Hyde Amendment. But beyond that, it was a no-go. You're not supposed to use taxpayer money for this. And now the Biden administration's all in. They're all in. Yeah. They're using it to promote abortion. They want to abort the third world. They're telling other countries they need to abort their children. They're doing abortion tourism. They're flying members of the military to various states to have them abort their children. They're part of, obviously corporate America is kind of all in on the leftist agenda. They want women never to leave the workforce and to raise children. Instead, they're paying to abort their kids. It's that aspect is a culture of death under which a lot of Americans are being forced into against their will.
Absolutely. And I think, and that goes back to the point of why I was disappointed that Trump is tabling the issue at a federal level, is because the only way you can fight that is to have a full-throated response that endorses a culture of life. You can't just try to say each state can decide for itself if it wants a culture of life, because then you have a nation divided. You need to have, from the top down, a full-throated endorsement of life from conception all the way to death. We need to take care of everyone in the womb, but also everyone throughout the entirety of their life.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, it's a neutral federal government when Republicans are in versus a culture of death when Democrats are in, and that's not a recipe for winning.
Yeah, and if you're a father, by the way, who creates a child, you have obligations to that child. No matter the status of your relationship with the woman, you pay your child support, take care of that kid. You're responsible for bringing it into the world, so you need to be responsible for taking care of it, and that's the message there. I think sometimes the left pretends like that part of the message doesn't exist on the right. It definitely does, doesn't it, John?
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. It's like your terms are acceptable. We will absolutely promote that as well.
Yeah, amen. All right, hey, John Hasson, thank you as always. John had some excellent posts on X. That's what they call them nowadays, I guess. Hey, John, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vince.
John was posting about this morning. Hey, good afternoon to you. It is 4:36 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up on the program, Julie Kelly is here. We'll talk to her about how the left is trying to destroy a federal judge by the name of Eileen Cannon. They hate her because she's treating Trump fairly, and that's not allowed. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. There's an effort afoot, I tell you, to change the name of Dulles International Airport to Donald J. Trump International Airport. That'd be cool, right? So we'd have a match set. We'd have Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump airports right here in Washington, D.C., and that's a special way to troll the left. It really is. Joining me now is Congressman Guy Reschenthaler from Pennsylvania's 14th Congressional District and the Chief Deputy Whip for the 118th Congress. Sir, good to have you back with us. Thank you.
Hey, always good to be on, Vince. I appreciate it. And you hit the nail on the head. What a way to troll the left. If they have to fly into Washington, D.C., they'll have two options. Either they're flying into Trump International or Reagan DCA. It's going to kill them.
Is that the point of this? Is this why you've introduced this legislation? Because you know how much they'd hate it?
Partially, I'm not going to lie, that is. But you know what? Look, you got to have some fun in this job, right? But there's three real main reasons. Number one, I think Dulles needs to be renamed. I was walking through the airport with some colleagues. I was explaining just how bad of a Secretary of State Dulles was, how he led to many of the problems we had in the Middle East and in Latin America in particular. A lot of it goes back to Dulles. Great book on it called The Devil's Chessboard, also Overthrow, two really good books on just how atrocious Dulles was. So now we started the conversation, so that mission is accomplished. And my second and third goal was to excite the base, focus on all the good President Trump did when he was president and the promise of his second term that's going to come here very shortly. And then thirdly, I just wanted to see the left overreact to this, which they did in spades. So all three objectives have been met. I'm very happy with the direction we're heading with this bill.
I love it. Okay, so it's obviously a piece of legislation, but what extent does it have a chance of moving forward? And luckily, you're the chief deputy whip, so you kind of have a stake in if this moves forward.
I do. Now, do I think the Senate will pass it in the next few months if we in the House pass it? No. I mean, there's no way Schumer is going to go for that. But if we do pass in the House, we could use it as a bargaining chip for legislation. But what I'm really excited about is in 2025, when we expand our majority in the House, when we retake the Senate, get Trump back in office, then we can actually get this accomplished and rename Dulles after Trump. The greatest president of my lifetime, by the way.
I love it. Well, you know, I have to say that I generally have a rule that I don't think any living person should have something named after them. It should be, you know, posthumous naming. But I will make an exception for this for the very reason that brings you so much joy. It'll annoy the left. And for that reason, I'm for it.
I appreciate you giving an exception to this one.
Yes, you've got my full-throated endorsement. Change the name. Although I have seen some people complaining that Dulles is such a miserable airport, especially aboard those people movers, that it may not be the highest honor to have it named after you.
You know, I hear that, but at the end of the day, there are more deserving airports that should be called Trump. But let's start with Dulles. Let's have Trump and Reagan here in Washington, D.C., and then we can move on and name a lot of other things after the president after that. But let's start by renaming Dulles.
All right. That sounds great. All right. Hey, let me move to an issue of immense importance to the country, which is illegal immigration. Give us a sense of what's going on in Congress right now, if anything, to try and get all of this under control. Joe Biden has just completely opened our borders, and the American people would like to see some action to get them closed. What can you tell us?
Yeah, well, Joe Biden and the radical left have left the southern border in particular wide open. And what you're seeing a lot of individuals coming across that are on the terrorist watch list. I mean, if you add up FY 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22, it still doesn't – there's still more people on the terrorist watch list that have been encountered under President Biden than all those other fiscal years, like I said, combined. Also, you got a problem with Chinese nationals. We've had something like 20,000 Chinese nationals under the Biden administration that have crossed the southern border, and I can guarantee you that a lot of them are coming here at the direction of the Chinese Communist Party. You can't even move hometowns in China without approval of the government, let alone venture to a foreign nation such as the United States.
And China's refusing to take them back. China is refusing repatriation of Chinese foreign nationals. So they're aiding and abetting military-aged males to come into the United States, and they say, we will not take them back. They're your problem now.
Well, yeah, and the Chinese have a lot of goals here. For one is just to disrupt the United States, period. But also there could be a more nefarious purpose here. If China decides to move on Taiwan, the first thing they would want to do is would want to create distractions here in the United States to then slow or hinder a response from us to aid the Taiwanese. They could do that if they have sleeper cells. I'm not naive enough to think that of these 20,000 Chinese men, military-age men that are coming across the border, that some of them aren't here to be those sleeper cells that the Chinese will use. But the original question about what Congress is doing, the House Republicans have done a lot. We passed H.R. 2. That was a border security bill,
yes.
First border security bill passed since like the mid-'90s. The Senate, though, just refuses to move any legislation. And that joke that the Senate had, the so-called bipartisan border bill, was absolutely laughable. Schumer played Mitch McConnell and Langford like a fiddle, and all they wanted was a piece of legislation that would fail, that they knew would fail, designed to fail, so they could turn around and blame this on Republicans. The American people are way too smart for that. They know that the border is an absolute disaster. They know Joe Biden is the president doing nothing about it. Mayorkas doing nothing about it. And they know that congressional Democrats have zero inclination to secure the border. So that's why immigration is such an issue heading into the fall, and why Republicans are going to take back the Senate, expand the majority in the House, and, of course, get Trump back in the White House.
Congressman Reschenthaler, I want to talk a little bit more about the Republican efforts in the House to get control of the border. First, though, that issue about Chinese nationals that you just brought up, you raised the idea that potentially you could have sleeper cells in the United States that could slow an American response to an invasion of Taiwan. That sounded like a pretty specific claim you were just making. Is that you just theorizing about what could happen, or is that predicated on some sort of meaningful intelligence that's informing what you just said?
Well, we've had, I'm a former naval officer, and here in Congress, I've done at least one war game with China taking Taiwan. And in every single one of those war games, it starts with China doing something to disrupt the United States response, whether that's a cyber attack, whether that's, possibly an EMP, whether that's just fomenting civil unrest, trying to recreate what we saw in the summer of 2020, for example, or a combination of all those. It will be something, because the Chinese know that they can't defeat us on head-on-head conflict. They need to do something to slow our response. And they need enough time to totally encircle Taiwan and blockade it from a United States response. What better way to slow our ability to break a blockade or prevent a blockade than to have sleeper cells disrupting here in the homeland? Remember, it only took 19 terrorists to pull up 9/11. Yes. I can guarantee you that Chinese have more than 19 individuals here already that are at the direction of the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, ready to create havoc when ordered to do so.
So Joe Biden had an extensive conversation with Xi Jinping by phone last week, but this issue was not listed in the readout by the White House. Do you know if Joe Biden talked about this at all?
I would guess that he was asking about Hunter Biden's $1 billion hedge fund that he got when he came out back from Air Force 2. No, I mean, I'm being cheeky with that, but Biden is completely weak and feckless in not only domestic affairs but foreign affairs. Sure. Dictator Xi looks at that. He knows that Biden's an absolute joke, not in control of anything that's going on in the federal government. To think there's anything that's substantial that came out of those talks, other than Xi just being reaffirmed in his notion that Biden is weak, nothing came out of those talks. And if you think that Joe Biden is going to be tough on China, you're kidding yourself. This has been one of the biggest Chinese apologists we've had. Remember, it's Biden that said he doesn't want to challenge China. He wants to cooperate with China. He's made many statements on that. We need to wake up to the fact that China has already declared war on the United States. They're launching a stealth war. There's actually a book called Stealth War by General Spalding. It's incredible. I'd encourage you to read it. But about the fact that China has already engaged in warfare with the United States and is slowly trying to weaken us. Case in point, going back to the southern border, the fentanyl that's coming across the southern border is directly targeted at weakening the youth here in the United States, killing off our military-age population. We know the components of fentanyl are imported from China and then put together in Mexico, brought across the southern border. Also, TikTok, another great example. It's the algorithms are hypercharged. It's meant to harm the youth in the United States. This is all done at the direction of the CCP and the PLA, again, to weaken America's military-age population.
Back on this issue of the border now, Congress now back in session today. It's contemplating what extent to send more money to Ukraine. I know Speaker Johnson has made it a priority, including in his conversations at the White House, that the border we really need to focus on securing is the American border. From your perspective, Congressman, what is the likeliness that Congress is going to pass something that does prioritize the American border before we give any more aid to Ukraine?
Well, I'm pessimistic that we're going to pass anything through the Senate that's going to secure the southern border. The Democrats have zero incentive to secure the southern border because they view those that are coming across as Democrat voters for generations. The joke will be on them because we're getting 55% of the Hispanic vote. And if you think that people coming here from Venezuela and Cuba are going to turn around and vote for the communist light elected officials that are the Democrats, you're kidding yourself. So the joke will ultimately be on them. But they also have this perverse notion that we somehow owe it to the world to take on all these illegal immigrants because of perceived faults of the West. Historically, so they're not incentivized both philosophically and through just their read on politics.
But they are incentivized by Ukraine funding. They desperately want more funding for Ukraine. So can it come with the condition that we secure our border?
Well, so the Senate package had border funding. It was all together. It was Ukraine funding, border, more money for the border. But I need to caveat that. I'll come back to it. There was money for Taiwan and money for Israel. The problem with throwing money at the border is it means different things to Republicans and Democrats. When Republicans think about throwing more money at the border, we think we're going to hire more Border Patrol agents. We're going to finish the wall. We're going to have infrastructure down there. When the Democrats think about money at the border, they think of having more processing.
Yes.
They're actually funneling through more illegal immigrants. So the devil is always in the details with that. Now, when it comes to Ukraine, what my suggestion would be to have 4 separate votes. Vote for Ukraine funding as a standalone, up or down vote. Do that the same thing for Taiwan. Do the same thing for Israel, and then do the same thing with the border. But try to get policy wins if we're going to send more money to the border. I think we should be afforded the ability to vote on all 4 of those as separate standalone votes. I don't know if that's going to how that's going to play out. That's ultimately Speaker Johnson's call. But going back to Ukraine, the media wants to portray this as it's a black or white issue where you're either for unlimited amounts of money for Ukraine or you're a Putin apologist. The truth is in between. There's a lot of Republicans that would vote for more money for Ukraine if it meant it was for lethal aid. We shouldn't be paying for the Ukrainians' pension funds. We shouldn't be paying for their domestic police forces. We should be giving them Stinger missiles, anti-aircraft batteries. We should be giving them the MiG-22s that they've requested. All the aid, by the way, that Joe Biden has slow-walked his entire administration.
Sure.
This war has been botched from the very beginning. And just finally, I just want to point out the stark difference between the Democrats on Ukraine and Israel, because the same people that are saying that Zelensky gets a blank check, that we shouldn't be talking about off-ramps for a peace and settlement between Ukraine and Russia, they're the same people that want to put limitations on the money we send to Israel. They're the same people that are calling for a ceasefire. They're the same people that want to condition all the aid for our number one ally, Israel. So it's amazing the contradiction from the Democrats on Ukraine and on Israel.
Yes.
And for all the talk about them wanting to defend democracies, Ukraine is a fledgling democracy. It's not perfect. I'm not going to argue that. But there is a democracy that's been around for 75 years, the only democracy in the Middle East, and that's Israel, which is under attack by a rogue authoritarian regime that's controlled by terrorists, and that's, of course, Hamas.
Yes.
So why would they not use the argument for defending our sister democracy, Israel, like they will for making the argument that we should defend Ukraine? It's quite remarkable. I'll let your viewers draw their own conclusion as to why that is.
Yeah. And by the way, Israel's a lot more likely to prevail over Hamas than Ukraine is over Russia. That's just the truth. The latest assessment showing that Ukraine is very much not in a winning position here in this war.
Of course. Well, Ukraine could have won early on had the Biden administration given them the military assistance they requested. But because Joe Biden slow-walked that aid, the Russians were able to make a lot of advances, and they formed defensive lines that are almost impenetrable. So we've got to be realistic about the options. These people that are saying that we're going to retake Crimea, we're going to retake Donbass and totally expel the Russians, they're delusional. We could have done that at the very beginning of the war. All that is now not achievable. The best thing we can do with Ukraine is have something that's similar to North and South Korea, where we formalize the lines, straighten the lines, and just have some kind of armistice. With Israel, though, Israel should be given the chance to totally destroy Hamas, go into Rafah, and then try to have some semblance of security over the Gaza Strip. But again, no one is being realistic with either the war in Israel or the war in Ukraine. Ukraine, we should be looking for an off-ramp and a peace settlement. With Israel, we should be encouraging them to destroy our mutual enemy, which is Hamas.
Congressman Guy Reschenthaler, thank you for your time today, sir. We got a lot on your plate. I really appreciate you taking some time for us. All right, let's see. I've got Dennis in Annapolis, line 1. Dennis, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Colonnese Show.
Hey, Vince, thanks for taking my call.
Yes, sir.
There's another reason to get rid of or remove Dulles' name from the airport, and that was his role in the Warren Commission, which, you know, he had been head of the CIA, and I think Kennedy fired him because of the CIA's involvement in the Bay of Pigs incident, and so Dulles is part of the Warren Commission. I'm sure that he was less than objective in his analysis of any CIA connection with, possible connection with this JFK assassination.
Interesting.
He would tend to push things away from the CIA being responsible or having any responsibility at all.
Just so fascinating. You know, I saw a clip recently of remember Judge Andrew Napolitano? He did a podcast with Jeffrey Sachs. The two of them were sitting, and he was telling a story about how he said to Trump, he's like, hey, you should really release the JFK files. And Trump leaned into Andrew Napolitano, and he said, if they showed you what they showed me, you wouldn't have released it either. That is provocative. Well, maybe one day we'll get a chance to ask President Trump about that again. It's 4:58.